Good morning and welcome to this online conference organized by ISPI with the knowledge partnership of McKinsey & Company in the context of the Center of Infrastructure, ISPI, McKinsey & Company. This conference is inspired by the annual report Digitalization for Sustainable Infrastructure, the Race Ahead, report that has been released today by the Center of Infrastructure. Digitalization is at the core of the struggle to recover the European economy in the aftermath of the pandemic. Today is also one of the main characters of a global race where competition between countries is rising constantly. Digitalization is crucial, but public finances cannot cope along with this challenge at a time when they have to address the energy crisis and the economic fallout from the war in Ukraine. It's a pleasure for me to introduce Mr. Paolo Magri, Executive Vice President ISPI. Good morning, Mr. Magri.
Thank you. Good morning.
And Ms. Gelsomina Vigliotti, Vice President, European Investment Bank. Ms. Vigliotti wrote one of the chapters of the report too. Good morning.
Good morning.
Two questions for Mr. Magri. Do we have to surrender to the idea that the world is going to be more and more divided? And what can Europe do to make its offer and its model more attractive in the global race?
The short answer, yes, we will have to live with more competition. And the second answer is longer. What can Europe do? I will say a few words in my brief intervention. So let's start from this year, 2022. 2022 was supposed to be the year of eventually back to the future. After the pandemic, optimism was permeating the market, but over these last 9 months, we came to realize that, yes, we are back to the future, but also that the future looks back. It looks back to the wars of the last century, it looks back to the 70 energy crisis, it looks back to the inflation rate of 40 years ago. And on top of that, we have all the crises upon crisis, that's the IMF title. And despite the avalanche of disaster, the good news is that so far we have held up. There have been no generalized defaults, no major political landslide, no extension of the conflict out of Ukraine so far. However, no matter how this war ends, not everything will get back to what used to be before February 24. And trust among states will probably be one of the primary victims. Trust had already been tarnished by COVID when we stole each other masks and ventilator and vaccine and closed borders. But Russia lies about its intention to invade Ukraine. A G20 country bombing of civilians on European territory clearly plummeted trust further. Let's be clear, we have never been all friends to each other. A world of friendly states was a very short-lived dream born after the fall of the Berlin Wall. But we believed that economic interdependence, the fact that someone was selling and someone was buying, would have held the war together. We believed that when goods cross borders, soldiers will not. In Ukraine, the opposite became evident. When soldiers cross borders, goods do not. No grain, no oil, no gas. Until a few months ago, the idea of a war divided, and let me get back to your first question, into two blocks that don't talk to each other seemed absurd, like the concept of the West and the rest or democracy versus regime. But what we have been fictionalizing for more than 20 years could become more than a think tank rambling. This trend is even more evident in the ongoing competition between global infrastructure projects. We all know that on one hand we have China Belt and Road Initiative. On the other hand, the West presented its G7 Build Back Better for the World initiative and the European Union Global Gateway as a better option to the Belt and Road initiative. It is a good news, a significant reaction to Chinese projects. But in this tight competition, our proposal may look weak on 3 Ps: product, price, promotion. First, product. The Chinese offer is one, easily recognizable, immediately available. While the G7 plan is made up of national plans, they may lack coordination. Months have passed since the announcement, and it is still somehow unclear how the EU Global Gateway will connect to the Build Back Better or to the regional partnership with Japan and India. The risk is that the Western offer is merely perceived as a rebranding of projects already underway. Second, price. The G7 leader pledged to invest 600 billions over the next 5 years. As we know, China has invested nearly 880 billions since the creation of the Belt and Road Initiative in 2013. Not a huge difference, but as we know, devil is in details. 300 billions of the European project would be those already planned by the EU Global Gateway in 2021. 200 billion, those already planned under the Build Back Better for the World. And only 100 billion would be additional resources. Against this backdrop, the G7 countries are calling on the private sector to share the financial effort. But with the impending recession, it will be challenging to continue securing support from the private sector. The last P is promotion. China's investments are more attractive as they require less economic, social and human rights conditionality than the European and Western-led initiative. And on the side of environmental sustainability, which could have been our trump card, Beijing is cleverly correcting its approach. In September 2021, China decided to stop funding coal plants in the Belt and Road Initiative framework. It clearly remains to be seen how sustainable this project will be from the environmental perspective, given the lack of transparency demonstrated by Beijing so far. Therefore, it is precisely on transparency and accountability that the G7 and Europe could push to present its infrastructure proposal as better than the Chinese one. So, to conclude, in a world of growing competition and race, the good news is that also G7 and Europe are assessing the role of infrastructure as a powerful competitive tool. We are late, this comes as the bad news, but something is eventually moving. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Magri. Thank you so much. Ms. Vigliotti, 8 minutes for you to answer a couple of questions. How is the EIB fostering the development of digital infrastructure in Europe and in the neighborhood? And which actions should be undertaken by governments and institutions to reduce the digital gap and crowd in more private investments? You have the floor.
Thank you very much. And first of all, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all the participants to this event, where as Vice President of the European Investment Bank, I'm very glad to participate. And maybe to dwell a little bit more into the detail on the infrastructure side, and in particular on digital infrastructure. The scenario proposed by Professor Magri put, the scenario under which we have to consider also the role of digital infrastructure. But let me get back before the pandemic. At that time, there was an important debate about productivity in Europe, in other advanced countries. And at that time, which now it looks quite strange, there were also issues about this link between the low productivity and low inflation. Now we are in a different world, but a different world where we know that inflation is mainly pushed up by by supply shocks and not some demand shocks coming from after the pandemic, but the link with the productivity is not anymore there as an element to be considered. But why I'm quoting this element? I'm quoting this because already before the pandemic, there was an issue on how to enhance productivity, how to enhance the potential of growth of advanced economies, in particular within the European continent. And in this regard, already at the time, the role of digitalization of the ICT industry was very, very much relevant. And my sense is that through the pandemic, actually, the role of digital infrastructure has become even more relevant. Actually, we realized, all the world realized how they are relevant for health, for sharing information, for keeping all people connected, for education. And in that regard, there was an high push for, and there is a continuous high push for increasing the role and enhancing their ability to connect all people, also within the most remote area. And actually, I would like also to underline how digital infrastructure are relevant for inclusion. Because if you live in a remote area, if you live in rural areas, being connected to the rest of the world for education, for health, for whatever, it will be very much relevant. And in this regard, when it comes to the European policies, we know that with the Green Deal, actually there were two main drivers of growth recognized as a key. And it was, innovation, digitalization, and sustainability. And in this regard, also the role of the in digital infrastructure for environmental sustainability is enormous. And at the European Investment Bank, the nexus between digital infrastructure and sustainability is very much closed. Through investment within the digital infrastructure, we are able to save a lot of energy. We are able to provide also the capacity through, for instance, the smart grids, to inject into the system much more renewable energies. So actually, we realize how relevant is how relevant are digital infrastructure for the business environment, and also for energy saving, and also for providing opportunity to those who do not have through the sharing of data. Because actually the availability of data, it's something which is very important for business development, but also for the very small and medium enterprises inside and outside the European Union. I would like to make some examples of operation that we have done so far. And for instance, in Italy, we financed in Italy, but not only in Italy, through a company linked to Enel, which is the biggest energy company in Italy. We enacted a program of 1 billion for smart meters. Smart meters are relevant because it allows a more efficient use of energy. There is much more ability to control the consumption of energy, as well as there are examples outside of the European Union, within the Union, for instance, in Eastern countries where maybe they lag a little bit behind these developments. For instance, in Poland, we financed an important program to replace internet cable with more high fiber network, which allow to actually we are able also to calculate how much energy it's possible to save through the utilization of these new instruments. This is to say that actually, again, this is there is a double objective that we can achieve by fostering investment within the digital infrastructure. It is also, to promote innovation, to promote business, and to promote sustainability. But one of the most relevant achievements that we can reach are outside of the European Union, in particular in the least developed countries, where actually they could, through the digital infrastructure, leapfrog some stages of development so that they haven't to rely on all the technologies, and they can start immediately with new technologies which could allow them to further develop without entering into all the technologies I said before. And in this regard, our focus in Africa, it's very much important, as well as in other parts of the world. I would like to comment, the very important issues which were underlined by Professor Magri about, what is the ability of the European Union to make an impact in infrastructure in Africa or in other part of the world outside of the European Union, because of the capacity of other countries like Greece and China to be speedier, to be more effective. And in this regard, I share Professor Magri thought about the need for the G7, for the European Union to be much more effective in implementing the plans that we want to plan. And there is an issue which is particularly relevant, and I believe it will be even more relevant also for the countries where digital infrastructure or infrastructure at large will be implemented, which is the issue of the quality standards. We know that quality standards bring with them, much more due diligence, much more control, and maybe it could be easier to accept financing by another foreign country which can offer the same type of product without less requirements. But in the end, I think that there is an increasing awareness about the role of sustainability, which is not only in environmental sustainability, but it's also financial sustainability. Because in the end, if we are able to make infrastructure which are built, understand, or enacted through good standards, they all last for longer, and also from a financial and economic point of view, not only environmental, they can get much more value. So what are the challenges now for the ICT industry in Europe? Our guess is that the major constraint is in making more investment at a time in which the breakdown of the supply chains make this investment more expensive. And actually, what we notice is that during the pandemic, actually there was much more focus on maintenance, on the improving of the current infrastructure, and some lag within the rollout of more advanced infrastructure like 5G. And in this regard, it's very important that we have to recover this lag in order to be competitive and with respect to other parts of the world. Because also from a statistical point of view, we see that Europe still lag behind other parts of the world like the US and China in terms of the role of the ICT within the value added of the economy, and also in terms of resources which are invested within the research and development. So in this regard, it's important to invest. And what could be the role of an institution like the EIB? The role of an institution like the EIB is to support private investment. We understand that there are positive externalities in this investment, and that's why it's important that a public intervention comes to support private investment and to catalyze private investment. Actually, what we like as a EIB is to enter into a project to provide our technical skills so that also private investors are attracted, and we can support them also in terms of technical assistance in providing them the elements to overcome the struggle that can be there can be in implementing investment. So in this regard, it's over the past years, the European Investment Bank is financing something like 2.5 billion in investment in financing for digital infrastructure and in digital services, because our approach is a comprehensive approach. We look at the infrastructure, we look at the services, and we look at the whole way in which the digital services can transform the economy. This is pretty in line with what the objectives of the European Union, and as well as also of the national governments. Actually, we know that through the RRF, there are 18 billions dedicated for the digital economy. And at the same time, we know that within the plans of the national of countries, there are also a huge amount of resources dedicated to this project that to develop digital infrastructure. In this regard, as EIB, we are ready to complement the resources which are necessary, but at the same time also to accompany this investment. We know, for instance, outside of the European Union, that governments can also need some technical assistance for looking at what is the regulation, what are the some regulatory measures which are necessary also for running digital infrastructure in an effective way. So, I mean, just to conclude, I would like to say that that the theme of the infrastructure is at the very heart of the EIB operation, but at the same time, the digital infrastructure attract even more relevance because of their impact on the transformation of the economy, for their climate action, for sustainability. And again, I would like to stress very much also the role of inclusion, because, actually in the end, it's a way through which people can be connected, educated, that can enter into business. And this is particularly relevant also for the micro, small and medium enterprises. And I would like just to finish also by remembering that there are many services which are attached to the digital infrastructure, like, for instance, the digital identity, something which related also to the person by itself, and to the access of public services. So in this regard, we are ready and we continue to be ready to invest in this sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you, very interesting. Thank you, Gelsomina Vigliotti. Thank you, Paolo Magri. Thank you to both of you. And now we are ready to go ahead to our next panel. Thank you. Welcome again. Welcome to our first panel, Competition or Cooperation, the Digital Plans of Europe, US, and China. I should remember to our audience that you have the possibility to ask whatever you want to our panelists. So just let us know. My first question is for Pier Paolo Settembri, that is the head of the unit for coordination and planning at the Directorate General for Mobility and Transport at the European Commission. Good morning, Mr. Settembri.
Good morning. Thank you for the invitation.
Here it is my question. What are the main challenges for future EU mobility, and in which sectors is the European Union investing to improve connectivity both internally and externally?
Well, let me start with a good example, which comes from a few hours ago, because the European Union and the ASEAN region just signed the first block-to-block air transport agreement, which will benefit 1.5 billion people. And I think it's a great way to show what we do, especially externally and in support of the EU Global Gateway. This is a major breakthrough that shows how the EU can add value for its region and also for global connectivity. But back to the question of the challenges. Of course, if you asked me this question a couple of years ago, I would have said the decarbonization of transport and its digital transformation, and with the Connecting Europe facility with its main funding instrument. Today, I would say the challenges remain the same. So decarbonization and digital transformation are still at the top of our agenda, but there are important differences that have brought us in a completely changed context. And I will just limit myself to list four. The first one is that the green transition has certainly become more urgent and needs to be adapted quickly. This is to accelerate the transition away from fossil fuels and also from foreign suppliers. There hasn't been almost a week since the summer without a new energy package adopted by the European Commission, and the next one will be announced tomorrow. The second point is that resilience has become an important challenge and at the same time a priority. In DG Move in the European Commission, we published in May a contingency plan for transport, which was supposed to draw the main lessons from the COVID-19 pandemic. And now we found ourselves writing quite a different contingency plan, because in the meantime, Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine changed the context. So the focus now is also very much on infrastructure and the protection of critical infrastructure. So resilience is something here to stay. The third difference, and I think here is a positive one, is that there has been an impressive and unprecedented mobilization of resources. With the Next Generation EU and the Recovery and Resilience Fund, we have now mobilized 750 billion euros grant and loans combined. And if we look a little bit closer, we will see that 240 of those are for the green transition and 140 for the digital transformation. And what is good for transport is that within these broad categories, the tickets that relate to sustainable mobility and the digitalization of transport, they come very high. So these are numbers that compare not too unfavorably with what the US are mobilizing with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, at least at federal level. The last point is, of course, the new geopolitical context. It's too soon to understand the ultimate impact, but it's already triggering changes at our level. Russia and Belarus have been deprioritized at least until 2050 from our infrastructure development. On the contrary, we accelerated the inclusion of Ukraine and Moldova into our maps, which is also a stepping stone towards their integration in the internal market. So the TEN-T network is and continues to be the backbone of our internal and external infrastructure policy. It is not only about hard infrastructure, but it's also about standards, it's about the regulatory framework, and it's also about what we want to see from our neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'll be back to you after in some minutes. Now, let me welcome Mike Ocano-Heymans, Senior Research Fellow at the Klingendal Institute. And this is my question for you. You two have 4 minutes more or less to answer. Which are the main goals of China's digital strategy? Again, both internally and externally.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's an important question, and one that is also addressed, of course, in your excellent report. So congratulations to ISPI and McKinsey, first of all, for this great publication. On the question of China's aims in its digital strategy, I think actually at home and abroad, it's very much related. And it starts at home, and what is important at home also needs to be, there's an external dimension of that. So let me explain why I say that, because I think the key objectives are basically, or 3 opportunities that the Chinese government sees with digitalization and the digital domain is, first of all, economic development. So digitalization and high tech can really help spur digital development in this 4th industrial revolution that we are now going through. And this is the case, of course, at home and abroad. And this starts from digital infrastructure. So no surprise that one of the best known Chinese companies today, Huawei, is in this telecommunication sector. And of course, that digital infrastructure can then be used also to create and to operate in new markets. So there's been a very strategic investment, I think, by the Chinese government to use digitalization for economic development. Then second point is security. And I think security, if we think about this in Europe, it's about security of citizens. Well, in China, it's really security, survival of power of the Chinese Communist Party. That is the Chinese definition, I think, of security, or the Chinese government's definition, at least. So, and that includes, of course, social control. So what criticasters have called sort of digital authoritarianism or tech-enhanced authoritarianism is also what is a key objective of the Chinese government, so as to secure security for the Chinese Communist Party. The second objective, I think, overall of the Chinese government in digitalization is a competition with the United States, because it's realized very early on that, you know, whoever controls the digital economy and who has the technologies at home can also shape the international order and thereby secure its own interests. So China is wanting to model also the rest of the world according to its own interests, and it's doing so by sending also its and helping its companies to operate and act abroad. So I think that is a key thing that we have to understand here in Europe, basically, that the overall objectives have been very strategically defined by the Chinese government and the Chinese Communist Party many years ago. And like Europe, China has devised many policies towards this end. I mean, in Europe, we have GDPR and DMA, DSA, many different objectives. China has also, in all these different fields, a lot of policies at home. But underpinning all these policies is what started in 2015, the Made in China 2025 policy, I think. And that was a push for technological prowess, you know, having technological strength at home. So for now, of course, we all know that for its chip production, for example, China is still very dependent also on other countries, including in Europe. But it's trying to really develop its own strength so that is no less so dependent towards the future. And I think it has also the Chinese government recognized the importance of data in all of this. So it's no surprise that also data is an important point that the Chinese leadership is looking at. And it's looking at this also in a very different way compared to Europe, because it's emphasizing, the role of data and data localization. So making sure that there's as much data as possible that stays within China, because having those data will empower your companies to still develop even stronger. And if they are strong enough, they can obviously take all that knowledge abroad and build sectors there. And for this purpose, of course, we have seen that China has built its digital Silk Road, that in the past few years has become a very important part of the Belt and Road Initiative overall. I think it's, again, for Europe important to recognize this and to offer alternatives to the many countries that are wanting to really also develop economically digitally, and are looking for others to help with this. So yeah, China is definitely one very interesting offer. They have very strong companies, including in sustainable and tech and green energy business. So we have to be, again, recognizant of that. I think should leave it to that, I believe.
Thank you. Thank you. And now we have Julian Müller-Kaller, that is resident senior fellow at the Geotech Center, Atlantic Council, and is one of the report's authors too. This is my question for you, Mr. Müller-Kaller. Against a backdrop of global technology competition, which strategies and plans is the US pursuing to maintain its technological leadership, in particular, of course, when it comes to digital infrastructure?
Yeah, well, thank you very much also for having me. It was a great great honor to contribute to the report and now discuss some of its findings. And I'm inclined to just present the counter argument to what Mike just said, because we are indeed, or not the counter argument, but the other side, particularly from the US point of view in that great power competition that you are referring to. Maybe I want to make 3 points. Two of them focused internally, and then the last point focused on externally, in particularly with regards to the competition to China. So I think that the Biden administration is trying to look at digitalization through a variety of angles, and the first one is to really catch up in erecting a green economy, because obviously the Trump administration has put a hold on a lot of the efforts that the Obama administration put in place. So they're trying to play catch up. And then the second point is to really build a more tech-skilled, inclusive workforce. That, this notion of foreign policy for the middle class is very much tailored also towards stopping the deterioration of the American middle class. I just want to bring one statistic that always really blows my mind. The US has around 3,000 counties, and Joe Biden in 2020 won 520 counties, so only 1/6 of the nation's counties. But those counties, those 520 counties, stand for 71% of American GDP. So you see that the last technological revolutions, particularly the transition from a production-based to a service-based economy, has really changed the hubs of growth, mainly, driven them towards the cities and rural areas, sort of the left behind places, particularly in the Rust Belt, have seen, stagnating wages and to some extent even declining life expectancy, so on and so forth. And this is where the populist support for Trump and like-minded candidates has been the strongest. So I think the Biden administration is looking at digitalization to sort of revive those areas, the potential of broadband access, the opportunity to work from those places, and stop thereby the deterioration of what it means to be middle class in the United States. And that's a challenging endeavor that might as well, and that's what I argue in my contribution to the report, pretty much define the likelihood of survival of American democracy if you look at the challenges that the country has and has had in the past. And then the third element, and this is really what I said, kind of related to what Mike had just said about China, it is about outcompeting China on a global scale. I think that the United States is looking at China's rise and gets really scared. Particularly heavy investments in emerging technologies. The Chinese are sort of looking at the United States and realizing that the early investments in computing technology in the 1990s secured the United States the place that it has right now as kind of the leading innovator when it comes to computing technologies, and they're trying to replicate that when it comes to emerging technology. As Mike has said, they have a very good start or foundation for that because they have access to an incredible amount of data that particularly European but also American competitors might not have in that regard because of privacy laws or privacy restrictions and consumer habits. But they are trying to replicate that success that the United States has had in the computing industry when it comes to emerging technologies. And that scares Washington, I would argue. I think that we see an increasing securitization of emerging technologies, of digital technologies. Everything is pretty much seen through the prism of national security because from a US perspective, securing its position as a leader and as the sole superpower in the world is very much dependent on being number one, also with regards to technological development, and that is why you see a tightening of export controls. We've just seen last week, basically the ban of a Chinese high tech being able to be sold in the United States, and we also see heavy investments into those areas. So that's another argument that I'm making in the contribution to the report, is that in order to tackle the Chinese rise, the US is becoming a bit more like it, meaning the return of industrial policy and mercantilism, quite frankly, which I think is going to be quite a big challenge for the Europeans who certainly lag behind in this global race for technological autonomy or supremacy. So I'll leave it at that and happy to go further into the discussion.
I have another question for you. What about the US strategy for digital infrastructure in the Indo-Pacific region? And how is the US coordinating with the main allies, for instance, within the Quad framework?
Yeah, no, it fits quite nicely to the latest argument that I was making. I think that its allies, whether that is in Asia or in Europe, are running danger of being put in a position where they basically have to choose sides. If export controls or secondary sanctions are being used to ban Huawei technology, for instance, as has been previously mentioned, the Chinese alternatives when it comes to digital infrastructure or emerging technologies are usually cheaper than the Western alternatives. So from a development perspective, it's very attractive to go the Chinese way, even though it comes with maybe the knowledge that you're being spied on. But from a development perspective, it makes a lot of sense to go with the Chinese route. And I think that the US and its Western allies are trying to change that, and they do that to some degree by creating incentives, but also by threatening with export control mechanisms or secondary sanctions. And I think that the Asian countries, which to some degree are more economically reliant on China, it puts them in a really difficult position, similar to the European countries, where if you are, imagine a world where we basically have bipolar confrontation between the United States and China and partial decoupling, particularly in the high-tech sector. Those countries can no longer sort of pick and choose, but they are being pushed into a position where they have to choose one side over the other. and that would come then with a significant economic implications. So I believe that particularly in Asia, it will be a battle over economic influence. It will be a battle over technological influence moving forward, and then particularly a country. I mean, I myself, I'm from Germany. Heavily export-oriented industry. Much of our wealth is dependent on open markets and free trade. And I think that this period of globalization, as we've known it, with lowering of tariff and non-tariff trade barriers, is significantly coming to an end. And that will have economic implications for countries in Europe as well as in Asia, as they're being forced to choose sides. And I think that we are seeing already kind of an answer from the Chinese, who are also threatening economic sanctions or implications if Western or other companies in Asia comply with American sanctions. So they're basically being sanctioned for for avoiding sanctions from the American side. And that is what I would describe as this partial economic decoupling, particularly in the high-tech sector, and this securitization of emerging tech that we see from the two great players, and the rest is kind of trying to play catch up while not having the capacity. So it could be quite brutal for the rest of the world.
Thank you so much. I'll go back to Ms. Okano-Eyman again about the Indo-Pacific region. How is the European Union fostering digital connectivity in the Pacific region?
Yeah, that's a great question following up on what was just said. I think there's basically three courses of action that we can distinguish, right? It's the EU and the member states in the Pacific region. It's with the Pacific region. And it is EU and the member states and the Pacific region, sort of in multilateral institutions, and perhaps even, just focusing on the region-to-region connectivity, as we just heard. The air transport agreement, I think, is an interesting example of that. And perhaps I can first share my conclusion also of all those investments. You mentioned the Global Gateway earlier. That was obviously published last December, but before that we had the EU-Asia connectivity strategy. The EU has been investing, focusing on the Indo-Pacific region for quite a few years now. And the political momentum to act is really there. There's a push from the highest up levels, at the President of the European Commission, of course. But I think we have to, as also your ISPI Vice President was saying, well, we're moving too slow, and the EU focus, the EU is weak on, I believe he said, products, price, and promotion. But I think we can add to this, actually, go a level deeper in our understanding, with the aim, obviously, to solve this problem, is because we have not really added the strategic allocation of funds and of people to this important topic. So we were late, I think, to recognize the strategic importance of and the geopolitics of tech and digital. Thinking of technologies as just another economic sector, unlike China and the US, where they really invested from a strategic perspective. And then also fundamentally, we have to really reconsider how we organize public-private sector relations. So this is digital connectivity projects, especially in the Pacific, where there's a large need for digital infrastructure still. They really require scale, and that requires private sector investments, as Ms. Viglotti of the EIB was also saying in her opening remarks. So this requires a fundamental shift in basically the way that we have looked at public and private sector relationships over the past few decades. And indeed, we are late on industrial policy. I think the EU is catching up quite rapidly, actually. But especially taking that to third regions there's a lag, because we are focusing now very much on sort of protect policies at home, and we need to really also shift our dealings outside. And the challenge, I think, here is that the international partnerships, the director generals in the lead with Global Gateway, but they are still adopting very much an old development narrative. Whereas countries in the Indo-Pacific, they want the EU to turn to a needs-driven approach, rather than, we come help you with what we think is most important for you. And that is a shift that DG INPA has to go through as we turn to the Global Gateway, and that is happening, but it's happening slowly. Of course, Action Service had been in the lead but they really didn't have the money. So they were sort of, given a different role in this file. And they are now in the lead with digital negotiations, but not so much in projects. And they know very, the nitty-gritty details of the projects and understandings of that are obviously not with the people, who are in the External Action Service. So we need more of those highly skilled on the very sectoral level people in the Indo-Pacific also. And then finally, I think the EU and the member states have the money, but they are slower also to develop that strategic understanding, and they're not always able and willing to work together. So those are, I think, some of the issues that really have to be overcome for the EU to be really powerful in acting in the region with a focus on ASEAN, and then with the region with a focus on Japan and South Korea. And obviously also Singapore and India, where we have digital partnership agreements being negotiated and the connectivity partnerships, but they need to be filled really with detail. And I think that's where the EU stands its challenge today.
Thank you. Mr. Settembri, what strategies and policies are being adopted by the European Union to scale up the use of the digital technologies in sectors like mobility, logistics, transport, and which are the main sectors that could benefit the most from these policies?
Yes, as I said, the Trans-European Transport Network is the backbone of our internal and external infrastructure policy. It is the tool that we are using to build a sustainable, smart, resilient and multimodal infrastructure. And last December, the Commission tabled a proposal to upgrade its infrastructure policy, to upgrade this network. And now digitalization permeates this initiative in all dimensions. So the sectors that will be covered are all the transport and mobility sectors. So, for example, in rail, it will be the deployment of the rail traffic management system, RTMS. I'm sure you will hear about this from Mr. Mazzola in the next panel. It will be also the decommissioning of the Class B systems. In inland waterways as well, we have a river information system that will be fully digital. In maritime, we have the vessels traffic management and information system, and you're already deploying the single window. In aviation, the air traffic management is being digitalized, also thanks in particular to the CESAR project. And in roads, which is the largest sector and probably the most difficult to digitalize, we are working on the intelligent transport system, intelligent traffic management, but also digital tools to ensure enforcement. One of the innovations of this upgrade is that the digitalization enters also the freight terminals, which will have to be equipped with digital tools, in particular to ensure efficient terminal operations and the exchange of information. Now, if I can make a bit of a broader comment, we usually mention digital technologies as a way to improve and to facilitate the sustainability objectives, to accelerate the green transition, because efficiency is usually presented as a way to cut emissions. But digital tools can prove critical also in other contexts and for a variety of purposes. And I will limit myself to three very specific examples, which from our perspective were very important. During the pandemic, the Commission worked together with the European Agency for the Space Program to develop a Green Lanes mobile app. Green Lanes is a concept that we developed at the beginning of the pandemic to let freight move in the EU, especially through roads, with the idea that border crossing checks could not take more than 15 minutes. And thanks to these tools, lorry drivers and national authorities could track time and maybe also take different decisions based on the situation at each border. And this enabled us also to monitor the situation over time and to make sure sure that this 15 minutes limit was respected, and in fact, it kept open the internal market. Today, in the middle of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, we developed the concept of solidarity lanes, which are lanes that use railroads and rivers, ports, to export grain and also other commodities, and to enable the imports to Ukraine of what they need, for example, fertilizers. We exported around 13 million tons of grain since May, and we feel that we somewhat reached the capacity of what the infrastructure can bear at this point in time. What is the way to go beyond this capacity? Well, it's through digitalization. So Ukraine joined the Common Transit Convention on the 1st of October, which means also access to state-of-the-art IT systems, and we think that this would provide a breakthrough and improve the situation on the ground. We have a new area that hasn't been digitalized yet, but for which there is unfortunately new momentum, because we are in the middle of a war context, and therefore military mobility, which is an initiative of 2018, which was funded, although with limited fund at the European level, with the current multi-annual financial framework, as a new chance now to be boosted with the midterm review of the MFF, but also with the new action plan that is to be adopted before the end of the year. And as a wish, I think digitalization should come also in this field, for example, to digitalize communication between armed forces and within also custom authorities, and to achieve the objective of quick troop movements in Europe, which has never been so important. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now I have a question for you, for Pierpaolo Settembri, from our audience. Let me see, I'm getting older. How could the global gateway be the key to foster European Union digital connectivity, especially with developing countries?
Well, it does, because it provides certainly a framework that can direct investments. We have an instrument for that. It's called NDC. And it can target also partner countries all over the world. Of course, for this to happen, it is necessary that the same priorities are outlined by the partner country, because we respect the fact that between partners they should set their own priorities, and we certainly ready to support them. Now, the way, and I was referring to the example of the ASEAN region, that agreement is not so much about building infrastructure, but it's about liberalizing markets and also cooperating on the regulatory framework. This is very important also for our developing countries. We have programs to assist them on a wide range of transport dimensions, including aviation security, including road safety. So we don't necessarily follow a strict infrastructure building approach as other international partners are following. We follow a more comprehensive approach, which includes also standards and regulatory frameworks.
Thank you. Another question for Ms. Okano-Eyman. This is from our audience too, and it is also the last question of the second part of our panel. Where do we stand when it comes to geopolitical competition on digital standards, and who is leading the race?
On digital standards, that's a difficult one, because standards obviously are built and made in international institutions, and they're made from bottom up through companies. And by companies going abroad and enhancing interoperability by sort of inviting or seducing other countries also to adopt the standards that those companies bring. And I think here it's important to recognize that the European Union is not very well placed, because in the tech and digital sphere, many of the companies are obviously from the United States and from China. I mean, we have a few, champions, obviously, in specific sectors, including semiconductors and some in digital finance. and otherwise. But overall, we see the digital economy dominated not by European economies. So in that sense, I think Europe is facing a heads-up battle, an uphill battle in dealing in also bringing standards in the way that we used to do. I mean, the width of railway connections or of railway gauges, they have been set, by European companies. They've brought standards to other parts of the world. Same goes for the size of containers. That is not happening in the digital field, and I think we have to really invest in that. At the same time, of course, there's the multilateral institutions where also still standards are being negotiated and discussed. Here we do have oftentimes a good presence, but I think what can be stepped up here is also bringing in the companies here, because we see, for example, an internet protocol that is now also being negotiated again in the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union, that the Chinese have brought in technical expertise from the private sector, which is really ahead of the game in a way that no diplomat could ever, have that understanding of the topics that are being discussed. And we have to also invest in making sure that that we can also first of all, understand the proposals, because sometimes they can bring obviously good change in the system that we have, but also to push back, for example, when there's an inclination to move towards too much state involvement, in this case in the economy, and that's something that we want to resist.
Thank you so much. Let's move on with our conference. Thank you to all of our panelists, and we are ready for the next panel. Thank you. Welcome again to our conference. We are now ready to talk about the impact of digitalization on infrastructure, again with our guests. Let me start from Nicola Sandri, Senior Partner and Global Leader of Transport and Infrastructure at McKinsey. He is a contributor for the report ISPI, McKinsey & Company. Good morning, and thank you for being with us.
Good morning. Thank you very much for being here.
This is my question. How will digitalization, technology and artificial intelligence reshape cities' mobility? And which are the best practices already in place in Europe?
So first of all, thank you very much for the question. Of course, it's one of the key challenges and one of the key facts where the large investments at the global level are focusing here. Maybe I would like to project one page that can synthesize the key elements. First of all, let's consider one number. In the last 10 years, more than 500 billion euro has been invested in mobility tech around the globe. So the question will not be if or not will arrive a technology as a support to the mobility, but the question will be more on when. Couple of examples where these investments are concentrating in the next during these days and then in the future. My main 5 areas. The first of all is the self-serve electric vehicle rental. The second is the mobility as a service platform. The third one are about on-demand microtransit. And the last 2 are referring more on the congestion charging via traffic control, and last but not least, the dynamic route optimization, in particular referring to the freight and not only to the passengers. In terms of examples where these applications are happening, especially in Europe, a couple of examples. So city like Stockholm and less Milan, but is increasing in the last years, are one of the elements about congestion charging in the traffic control. And moving again to the mobility as a service platform, here we do expect a fierce discussion and a fierce competition among different players, both from pure digital app, but also from mobility operator, and last but not least, by more mobility and payment players. One key element in order to close this answer is to consider that Europe, compared to other regions, is maybe at the frontier of this technology, especially consider that is not only the champion about the sustainability and where the mobility can do a big part in terms of reducing the CO2 emissions. And the second is that is one of the highest dense area in terms of public transportation offering, compared also to other areas such as United States. So we do expect that in these 5 main areas, we could see important innovations and improvement for all us as citizens.
Thank you so much. Now we have Massimo Sonego, Chief Strategy and Corporate Development Officer at Atlantia. Here is my question. What is the role of digitalization and technology in road traffic management? And are we ready for a wider diffusion of smart roads into the European and into the Italian networks? And which best practices do you consider to be the most effective and promising?
In most developed countries, unfortunately, infrastructure are pretty old, in particular if you are talking of roads that have been built approximately during the 60s and the 70s, and no major further enlargement came after that period. So everyone know very well that building new infrastructure to make the present infrastructure network consistent with the demand of mobility that the new world is imposing, well, this is a big task for several reasons, including very high cost of construction, and in particular because no one wants a new infrastructure, new road in its own backyard. So the next challenge is to make this infrastructure, the present infrastructure, more and more effective without using extra and new land. So to be more compatible with the environment we live. And technology from this point of view is very helpful, at least for 2 major regions. First of all, technology helps the safety of the present infrastructure. For instance, think about the connected cars. So if you are able to dispatch signals along the road, telling the condition of the road, you may help drivers and cars to brake in advance if there is a jam, an accident, etc. Or think, for example, to the so-called digital twins. So you have a copy of an infrastructure. From a physical infrastructure, you have the digital infrastructure on a computer so that you can simulate what happens in case of an emergency, an accident, etc. So you can better plan and answer in case an emergency materializes. But there is also another very important role of technology. Technology basically is helping to favor the adaptation to the new paradigm of the mobility of the future. Think, for instance, to electrification. There is a big revolution for car makers, but it imposes a lot of challenges for the way we are living. We are used to drive with our own car, because in order to make these cars to be as effective as internal combustion engines, you need to recharge those cars with very high power and capacity network. So you need to move power that is very scarce and rare to everywhere, basically in a city or along roads, with a lot of challenges. Because the power, we know every day the emergency we are coping with is not fully available at the power that is required. So, for instance, you can have 2 cars parking in front of a charging point, and a machine has to decide which of the 2 cars to charge faster. So big data, for instance, may help from this point of view, because if you know that a car is driven by a business professional that probably usually stops for 1 hour in a place, then he has to jump in the car again and to move faster to another place. Well, in case that car is out of battery, all the power is sent to that car. While if the other car is driven by a person who is basically moving the car only in the weekend and is in that park just because this is used to do every week, so no hurry to send energy to that car. So big data and customer behavior, the knowledge of the customer behavior is very fundamental to solve bottleneck in energy, for instance. But this is, if we push this rationale further and we look carefully that the integration between big data, analytics, and physical infrastructure is very, very important in the new world, because the characteristics of the new way to move people and goods is individualism, because in particular after pandemic, people want to travel on their own in the way they prefer, and they select the best way to move on the basis of cost of travel, comfort, etc. And on the other side, you have multiple ways to move peoples and goods. So smart mobility with sharing mobility, for instance, or think to the future, urban mobility, urban vertical mobility, or in the future, hyperloop, etc. So the world will be made of several transportation means to be interconnected, and technology may help the consumer to switch from one system to the other in the smoothest way. For instance, things about payment. If you have to pay each single system in a different way, it's going to be a mess. While if you can pay all these transportation system with a sort of one single electronic wallet, of course, it's much more important. So this means to another big challenge, how to make all the several stakeholders cope and work towards the same direction. And the main stakeholders in this kind are a lot. You have IT providers, you have car makers, you have road operators, you have public administration. So you have to make them very, very efficient and to work in the same direction in establishing common standards. For instance, in Austria, we have recently acquired a company, Unex, a former division of Siemens Mobility, while Unex in Austria developed the most advanced system on 2,200 kilometers of the main national roads. And all these roads are equipped with a system to connect cars and the road. So it's the first prototype of smart roads, actually. And this is perfectly in line with the new standards approved by the European Union. But today there is only one car sold in Europe that is equipped to fully understand this kind of signal sent in case of accident, traffic jam, etc. So this will take time. More and more cars equipped with this system will be on the street. And honestly, you don't need to have 100% of cars equipped with this system. If you only have 10% of cars connected, this could be enough, because of course, if you can send this message and 10% of cars in front of you start to slow down, also all the others will slow down. So you will have the same impact on the full community of travelers on the road. So technology is helping a lot, and is helping sooner than what we expect. We just need to work all in the same direction and to work with common standards and work for that to happen soon.
Thank you. Thank you. I know that you have to leave in advance our conference due to your agenda. So let me ask you another question, the last question. How can digitalization, AI and technology help to reduce road traffic emissions and improve sustainability? What is the way ahead?
Well, we talk a lot of innovation, we talk of sustainability. Those two phenomena are not two separate words. Actually, in the new taxonomy, we use one single word to capture these two phenomena, and we talk of innovability. So that is exactly putting together innovation and sustainability. What does it mean? For instance, means first of all to improve living condition. Again, I can make an example. A subsidiary of us, Unex, as you mentioned, is deeply involved in working with Transport for London. That is a large consortium of manufacturers and transportation companies in London, promoted by the municipality of London, and Unex is in charge to develop the largest ultra low emission zone. Basically, it's an enforcement system to fine and sanction cars that are not consistent with the low pollution standards imposed to assess in this ultra low emission zone. And this is materializing in minus 44% reduction in NOx, 10,000 tons of CO2 cut, and 24% less in delays, so people stuck in traffic losing time for doing basically nothing, through a system of traffic optimization and automation. So it means to put interconnection, cameras, traffic lights, sensors, etc., and guide traffic. For instance, in traffic lights, you can give red or green to different direction in order to reduce congestion on one side of the city or the other, and moving traffic from one suburb to the other. It's not just improving living condition, it can be also pursue breakthrough innovation. So to think in a totally different way. For instance, a couple of weeks ago, we had in Rome the first test for Volocopter. That is an aircraft that may take off and land vertically on a so-called vertiport. In the Fiumicino airport, we had the first ever working vertiports in Europe. And this is a very breakthrough innovation, because basically you can land with these small aircraft that are totally electric, so they do not pollute. They are much less and less silent than whatever present helicopter. So you can land, for instance, on a pad on top of a railway station, on top of an exhibition center, on top of a building, etc. And you can commute from the airport to the city center without losing time queuing on a toll road to get to the center. So this is, for instance, a new wave of moving people and goods. And after this successful test, we expect that Volocopter is in operation in Rome, for instance, by 2024. So we are all looking for this new way to move people and goods in the new world.
Thank you so much. Let me welcome Alberto Mazzola, that is the Executive Director of the Community of European Railway and Infrastructure Companies. He is the author of one of the chapters of the report too. Mr. Mazzola, what is the role of digitalization in improving rail transport, both in terms of competitiveness and sustainability?
First of all, thank you for the invitation. I was also very pleased to cooperate for the preparation of the report. Let's say, in terms of, you raised the question of competitiveness and sustainability. Let me say, in terms of sustainability, that railway credentials are quite good. We are 7 to 9 times more energy efficient than road transport and 15 times more energy efficient than aviation. What does it mean? Any passenger or any good that moves from these transport modes to railways will be an increase in energy efficiency. So then, getting back to the point on competitiveness, of course, that's another challenge. So we need to have prices competitive or provide more comfort, better services. Let me say that digitalization will have an important role and a short-term role compared to investment in infrastructure, which is needed. So what are we thinking in terms of digitalization? In the shortest term, how to better use the infrastructure that we have. So this is called digital capacity management. To give you an understanding, easy understanding, is a Google map of railways. So if you want to run a train, being able to see from origin and destination, if you can run your train in the hours and the day that you want. Let's say it's not so simple as in road, because traffic in railways is very heavily regulated, long-term planned. And so this is a way that to make it more efficient. We expect to have 5% more capacity by using this system. And we expect that in 2 or 3 years that this will be able to be implemented. Getting more longer term is the European Rail Traffic Management System. This is also a digital system. That will be more long term. We are seeing now the new proposal of the Commission to finalize the deployment of ERTMS by 2030 on the European core network, and by 2040 on the comprehensive network, extended core network. So it's a more long-term challenge. And here we expect to increase the capacity by 20-25%. What does it mean, increase capacity in these ways? We don't need to build new infrastructure, but by digitalizing what we have, we will have a definitely increase, let's say 25%. Further measures that might be interesting also, it will be, and that's a project more short-term, digital automatic coupling. We would like all the wagons used for transporting freight to be coupled together automatically, but also with a digital and energy connection, so they can be powered and they can provide information where they're going around. Let's say these are the main projects that we have today. And looking more forward is an automatic train operation. So being able to run trains around the European network without any driver, any conductor, and being able to run these trains all around. Let me say that just to make a point, digital alone will not be enough for railways. So we have seen in the last post-COVID, for instance, a huge increase in long-distance passengers by rail. People want to travel by rail more. We've seen demand also coming for freight. And we have now, let's say, 3 to 5% of the infrastructure is congested. So we need more digitalization, and we'll get 25% more. But since there is also a target to double high-speed passenger and freight on railways, we will need also infrastructures, physical infrastructure. So let me say, digital and physical will be needed both. Last point, thinking about the customers, I heard before mobility as a service. That's an important point for us, especially for commuters and the local dimension. But we are also discussing with the European Commission and other institutions to have a European ticketing system. So being able to have a ticket system where you can buy from one city to another and being able to buy everywhere in Europe. And a similar system we are reflecting for freight. So digitalization definitely will bring a lot. The strength and weaknesses of railways is that it's a system, large system. So in many cases, we need to implement on most of our lines or most of our infrastructure. It's not just a small investment. So it's something that takes time, takes investment, but brings also huge benefits.
Thank you, very clear. Andrew Watt wrote one of the chapters of the report. He's a senior advisor at Eurocontrol. Mr. Watt, how could digitalization and technology improve the air transport sector and traffic management, in particular when we talk about sustainability?
Good morning, and thank you for asking me to contribute. I come from the air traffic control sector. I think we have to remember that our goal is to ensure the safe and the expeditious flow of traffic. Safety is a given, but expeditious for me embeds the concept of efficiency. So we have to try to make our system as efficient as possible. And by doing that, at least on a flight-by-flight basis, we will reduce fuel burn and we reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We think that at an absolute maximum, we can reduce fuel burn and emissions by between 5 and 10% per flight compared to today. That's going to take a lot of investment, and digitalization will be the key to that. I think we have to remember that the distances between airports, they're fixed. We can't change them. All we can actually modify is the time spent in the air. So when we talk about flight efficiency, we're really looking to reduce the amount of time spent in the air, understanding that aircraft will fly depending on weather conditions. So if you fly transatlantically from west to east, so from the United States to Europe with a strong tailwind due to the jet stream, you could save up to 1 hour on what would be a typical flight time. So anything we can do to save flight time means that we can reduce fuel burn and emissions. The decision-making processes that we have to get to that point are already fairly heavily digitized, but we need to do more. It was interesting to hear earlier the talk about digital twins. The airlines actually, or the aircraft engine manufacturers, they have digital twins of every single engine that is actually on an airframe. And they have data being downloaded all the time from the aircraft. That's a highly digital process, and it uses up a lot of bandwidth. The underlying technology for that is also used by air traffic control for something that we call data link, which is essentially, it's like an SMS or a WhatsApp between an air traffic controller and a pilot. So it's instructions, it's requests from the pilot, it's acknowledgements. And quite a lot of that can be done digitally. That saves time, it's more accurate, so it's a safety feature, and therefore it actually increases capacity. But the difficulty we have is that the underlying technology is reaching its limit. It's relatively old, and we think that we will have reached our maximum capacity by the end of this decade, which means we need to move to new technologies. Moving to these new technologies, we think could actually boost capacity by about 11%. And that is really important from the digital perspective because it allows us to download in real time from the aircraft information about the intention of essentially the flight management system as to where it's going to fly. So the flight level is, of course, negotiated with air traffic control, but the real route of the aircraft is determined on board the aircraft by the flight management system, working with all the navigation aids, etc., taking into account weather. And with the new digital technology, we can actually downlink that to the air traffic controller, which gives he or she a much better idea about the actual intentions of all the aircraft in the airspace that they are controlling. And this is really important for us in the future because in 2019, we had our peak day of traffic ever, which was just over 37,000 flights in a 24-hour period in June 2019. We're not there yet. We're still about 13% below where we were at the equivalent period in 2019. But we nevertheless reckon that we might have to handle 50,000 flights a day sometime between 2040 and 2050. And we're really only going to do that with digitalization, especially the data link technology I talked about. And so that will be satellite communications and other new technologies that we're preparing in air traffic management. When it comes to the decarbonization side, improving flight efficiency, as I said, reduces fuel burn and emissions. But we also have to look at the infrastructure as well, in particular because at the United Nations International Civil Aviation Organization General Assembly that took place just a couple of weeks ago, the member states overwhelmingly approved the policy to go to zero carbon air transport by 2050. That is a huge challenge because we rely on fossil fuels, in particular for long-haul flights. We may get to electric or hybrid electric vehicles by the end of this decade for very short-haul flights, and maybe for medium-haul flights sometime from 2035 onwards. And we also have to cope with things like volocopter that was just mentioned with urban air mobility. But we have to decarbonize our infrastructure as well. We reckon that we probably consume somewhere between 1.1 and 1.2 terawatt hours of electricity per year. Some air navigation service providers, such as ANAV in Italy, are already doing a huge amount to decarbonize. They are going on to renewable energy contracts. They've got photovoltaic installations to power part of the headquarters, some of the air traffic control towers and other facilities, and other countries are doing the same. And then finally, a spin-off benefit of digitalization is that we can actually install more wind turbines. Now, that's not an air traffic management issue, except that the wind turbines, as they rotate, they reflect radar signals. That creates interference. That means that there have to be protected zones around our radars in which you cannot put a wind turbine for maybe hundreds of square kilometers around. But there's a new radar has just gone in where I come from Scotland, in the southern uplands. A new radar has gone in from UK's National Air Traffic Services, which is full of digital filters that take out the interference. They reduce the clutter, if you like. And with that, this sort of protected area can be shrunk. If not, it can be removed completely. And they reckon that this can actually provide for installing wind farms that could have a capacity of about 2.5 gigawatts for power generation. So that's a spin-off benefit for society as a whole of digitalization in air traffic management. Thanks.
Thank you. Welcome to Carlo Secchi, Vice President ISPI and the head of the Center on Infrastructure, European Coordinator for the Atlantic Corridor at the European Commission. With Alessandro Gili, he headed the annual report which inspired this conference. Welcome, Mr. Secchi, Professor Secchi.
Thank you.
Here it is my question for you. The European Union is in the process of revising and updating its TEN-T strategy. What does it change in terms of connectivity, and could it improve sustainability too?
Well, this is a very interesting question, and some has already been said on this matter by Mr. Pierpaolo Settembri, who belongs to DG Move behind all the ongoing process. What is the state of affairs at the moment? The proposed revision of the existing regulation, which dates back to 2013, is on at the attention of the Council and of the European Parliament. We expect a first decision before the end of the year, and then towards the second half of next year, the regulation to be approved after all negotiations have been carried out and appropriate compromises and agreements found. So something, as I said, was anticipated by Mr. Settembri. Let me add in a nutshell that the new regulation or the revised regulation foresees a better layout of the existing corridors, including some of the neighbors, in especially Ukraine and Moldova on the one hand, and the Western Balkans on the other, to assure also better connectivity with Greece and that part of Europe. It pays a special emphasis on some of the topics which have been so well discussed so far in this conference. Let me stress multimodality, modal shift, which is functional to sustainability and to better connectivity. In particular, a better development of logistic platforms, of freight terminals, of all of that allows passengers, but freight in particular, to move around more smoothly and with a lower impact on the environment. And it pays also special attention to urban nodes, which are expected. Urban nodes are defined as all cities above 100,000 inhabitants, and they are expected to come up with more urban mobility plans because a reinforced emphasis is put also on local and urban mobility, together, of course, with the main core of TEN-T regulation, which is to ensure cross-border connections and to make the European transport system, as it was already foreseen in 1957 by the Treaty of Rome, a really integrated system and not country by country going, in many cases, their own way. The new regulation implies the extension of standards together with a more careful definition of them, as it was already anticipated by other speakers in many fields, in order to ensure this more homogeneous system. Let me use an expression which was at the beginning of this venture called 10T system, that is to go from a patchwork, that is from a series of national and sometimes even local systems, to a real network. Many issues are there, including electrification, axle load in railways, length of trains, dimension of tunnels, digitalization, of course, and ERTMS, especially, as Mr. Mazzola already said, and the homogenization of track gauge concerning railways. Of course, UIC dominates in Europe, it started in Europe, but we have the Iberian Peninsula on the one side and the Baltic countries on the other with different gauges, and Finland as well. And finally, a better governance to make it possible to achieve all the ambitious goals the regulation has in mind, sets forth, and in particular, a better coordination between the TEN-T system and the rail freight corridors into something which might be called European transport corridors, with a better governance to assure better coordination and better definition of plans for investment, both in terms of physical infrastructure and digital infrastructure. So it's a very, very ambitious process going on, but I think we can be rather confident that it will be successful. Of course, member states have their own positions and ideas, but they are negotiating in a very fruitful way, I should say. Parliament is very much interested in this. So let's hope that by the end of next year, this will be in place and allow us to achieve better, or to be more confident to be able to achieve the 2030 targets for the core network and the 2050 targets for the comprehensive network.
Thank you, Professor Secchi. I'll go back to Nicola Sandri to talk about the urban quality of life. What impact will digital infrastructure and technology could have on the urban quality life?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much for the question, because of course it's our final targets and final objective to improve the quality of life. So let me start, as always, with a couple of key figures about cities. First of all, when we talk about cities, we need to consider that they are representing around 55% of the total population currently, and expected to increase by 70%. They represent 80% of the GDP, the global GDP. Third, they are representing around 60% of the total emission, but with only 2% of the total land use. So, of course, are very dense areas where, of course, the focus of technology in the infrastructure and mobility is the key enabler to improve the quality of life. A couple of examples coming from a recent study from our global think tank, McKinsey Global Institute, where we study along 8 different domains where technology can improve the quality of life. A few examples. Through, for example, the mobility as a service platform, we do expect that can increase the commuting time between 15 and 20%. We do expect that also the water consumption and the energy consumption, and think how is important in this current situation with the energy crisis that we are facing, we could expect between 20 and 30% of the reduction. Last but not least, of course, the targets of the net zero in Europe by 2050, and also as the latest in the US, are key drivers in terms of improving the quality of life. Few examples, think of what is happening now in Europe, but especially also in Italy, about the progression of moving to a fully electrified network and fleet about public buses, where we expect to increase by 3,000 different new buses for completely electrified, so reducing in an important way the number of emissions. last but not the least, of course, all these elements need to be three main challenges, need to be a challenge of three main things for the local municipalities. The first of all is the coordination among stakeholders, and other speakers say during previous discussions. Second is the focus about local, because each city has an independent situation where the local analysis and the local management make a difference. The third is to maybe go to an open market in terms of increasing number of potential concessions that can reduce the total investment coming from the public and then increasing the collaboration between public and private in order to make this technology real and available for the entire society.
Thank you. Now I have a question for Alberto Mazzola. What strategies is the European Union launching, and which funds are available to foster digitalization in the rail sector? The time is running out, so you have 3 or 4 minutes. Mr. Mazzola, the floor is yours.
First of all, let me say that the European Union has a small budget. It's 1% of GDP. 30%, 35% is going to agriculture, 35% is going to cohesion funds, and all the others sectors need to share the money which is available. So this is so the money available for investment is very limited, but it's important that the money is invested in, I would say, in synergy with what member states are spending in this field. So having said that, the money is limited. I give you some ideas. ERTMS is a very large-scale project. It's costing about, in terms of investment, between 80 and 100 billion euros. I think the European Commission might be able to invest 15 to 20% of this amount. The rest will need to come from member states. So, having said that, we are very grateful that there is a Connecting Europe facility supporting the TEN-T network. We are very grateful that the cohesion funds are investing in digitalization of railways in this member state. And let me say also very important, Recovery and Resilience Facility, Next Generation EU, in Italy PNRR, which is also critical for many investments. It's critical in Italy in this moment, where 25 billion euros will go to railways. And a good amount of this will go to digitalization, but also in other countries. So, having said that the money is limited, I think there's very powerful indication, because when the European Union invests in one direction, most of the member states follow, because they decided also to invest in this direction. So the synergy is very high, and let's say there is a convergence about European Union and member states. I hope I replied to you, so very limited amount, but let me say, since the decision is taken by member states and parliament, we'll find also other sources in order to invest there.
Thank you, very interesting. Let's go back to Andrew Watt. You two have 4 minutes to answer this question if you want. It's about, of course, the inclusion of artificial intelligence, automation, and digital technologies in the aviation industry. Which actions should be enacted to strengthen the cybersecurity in this sector, in the aviation?
Okay, thank you very much. Well, the overall policy that we're running to is basically the legal framework of the Single European Sky that embeds the single market within air traffic management. And the current major technological push is what we call the Digital European Sky. And that's basically levering the latest digital technologies to transform our infrastructure so we can handle the future growth I talked about earlier and do it safely and efficiently. So we're looking at more connected and automated ATM, more air-ground integration. We're looking at cybersecurity, which I'll get onto in a minute or two, AI, urban air mobility that's been mentioned previously, and even civil military coordination, because there is a great deal of coordination between the air traffic control services of the military and the civil sectors. When it comes to digitalization, I think one of the key things is that we have got a huge research project underway. So we've got a body called the CESAR Joint Undertaking, in which Eurocontrol is contributing over about 500 million euros of in-kind expertise. And the CESAR Joint Undertaking is running these digital sky demonstrators and has recently run one on urban air mobility. And The goal is to take technology up to what we call technology readiness level 6. And then that can be handed over for deployment, for sort of industrialization and deployment. And that's handled by the CESAR deployment manager, which is based now here in Eurocontrol. And one of the things they're looking at, in fact, is, of course, cybersecurity. They're trying to roll out some cybersecurity protocols. So we are moving from air traffic management as an industry in which basically everything was in our own walled garden, into something in which we're relying more and more on commercially or publicly provided IT infrastructure, for example, when we go to virtualization, etc. But we're a safety-first industry, so we have to know that all of our data is safe and secure, all of our transmissions between different air traffic management stakeholders are safe and secure, and for that we need to invest in cybersecurity. So here in Eurocontrol, we've got a team that actually supports airlines, air navigation service providers. We do ethical hacking, we do penetration testing, etc. We publish a report every year. So the amount of cyber attacks has increased 100-fold in the last couple of years. That's partly a function of maturity of reporting, but we still find that airlines are being hit for billions of euros worth of basically cyber issues every year. And what we're moving towards now is the introduction of public key infrastructure. So that will allow the safe and secure transmission of data between partners that can be identified as being safe and secure because they've got access to the public keys. And we're in the process of rolling a program on that out with the CESAR deployment manager over the next few years. And a lot of that will be underpinned by artificial intelligence. We published a report a couple of years ago called Fly AI, just as the pandemic struck. And that reported on the sort of state of play in the industry then, but it's moved on colossally now. We know that there are more than 30 AI-related projects within Eurocontrol, but we know there are many, many more out there within the aviation industry in general and air traffic management. And the last one I would like to highlight, which is in the report, was we provide air traffic control from our Maastricht Upper Area Control Centre for the airspace above Benelux and Northwest Germany. And through our AI work, looking at historical data, we are now able to identify in real time aircraft that we call slow climbers. So they're going to arrive at their assigned flight level later than foreseen. That causes a bit of a disruption in the airspace that a controller has to actually manage, and so may have to adjust instructions he or she gives to other aircraft in real time. So knowing that these aircraft coming in are not quite following the flight plan, but are being delayed in relation to where we thought they would be at flight level, is a key benefit of artificial intelligence. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Carlo Secchi. In conclusion of this conference, I would like you to share with us, if you want, your final considerations about this conference and about the report. You have the floor.
Well, thank you again. I think it was a very rich debate, very interesting, in my opinion at least, and I hope that all those who followed it, although in a distance manner, enjoyed it and found it useful. And I hope as well that they will give a look at the report produced this year, and that they also find in that report some useful ideas, hints, and issues to further develop. So I'm very grateful to the panelists who took part of this conference, and of course very, very grateful to all the authors who contributed to the report, and especially grateful to Alessandro Gilli, my co-editor, who was indeed able of keeping together and keeping good pace in a very difficult task, complicated not only by the pandemic and all its consequences, but especially by the dramatic developments with the war of aggression against Ukraine, which of course complicated life in many ways to everybody, including our authors and contributors. Having said this, I think that many useful elements have come up from the discussion, including what is going on at the European level, which is very important because it was not only possible to set new ambitious goals for the near futures in terms of sustainability, in terms of better connectivity, in terms of using in the best possible way what the digital revolution makes at our disposal. And I think that the examples given by Mr. Mazzola on ERTMS and showing how digitalization can increase also physical capacity and consequently allow us to better use existing physical infrastructure and to better plan what we need to expand it was very much interesting. And also the example given by Mr. Settembri concerning two emergency situations, the green lanes to tackle the problems of transport of goods in a rather efficient way during the pandemic, and the solidarity lanes developed in the case of grain and other exports necessary for the rest of the world coming from Ukraine are very interesting examples. So digitalization will produce a new very important revolution. It is up to us, of course, to make the best possible use of it, to learn from the experience gained in the recent past. And this is also the reason why a revision of the TEN-T regulation was tabled last year. The war was not there yet, but to think about, for example, dual use of infrastructure, which is the case of military mobility, and other similar situations to make the life of our people, of our citizens, fellow citizens, and the movement of goods more efficient, more environmentally compatible, etc., remains a fundamental goal. And goes to the basic liberties which the European Union wants to grant, wants to achieve and to preserve for its citizens and at the service of the whole world. So having said this, as I said, I'm very much satisfied, and I hope that my feelings are shared by everybody of the outcome of this conference. I'm very grateful to you, Mr. Federico Leoni, for your very careful and diligent and appropriate role of moderator. And of course, we will continue as ISPI to keep our attention high on these topics and other similarly related topics around this broad term of infrastructure, and come back to all our friends, to all those who follow ISPI's activity with interest, with other initiatives similar to the one of today. Thank you very much again.
Thank you. I really appreciate our time is up, but I want to stress again that the annual report, Digitalization for Sustainable Infrastructure, the Race Ahead, is now available for downloading. So thank you to our panelists, thank you to our audience, and a wonderful day to you all. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.